Hello again. I had occasion yesterday to travel across London and then use a train to an outer suburb. It is not an experience which I would recommend and shows more clearly than anything how the largest city in Britain has turned into a separate country in its own right, almost wholly disconnected from the rest of the nation. The part of the Central Line running from Leytonstone into Essex was not operating, and so rail replacement buses were running. Outside each of the affected tube stations were uniformed customer information officers, as their jackets announced. I spoke to a few of these and listened to and observed others. Every single one was foreign. I don't mean that they were Jamaicans or Bajans whose native language is English. I mean literal foreigners with thick, incomprehensible accents and poor understanding of the English language. Indeed, the man to whom I first spoke did not seem to possess the ability to speak any language, and for all I know to the contrary, he was wholly mute. I say this because the guy whose colouring and facial features suggested to me that he came from West Africa simply did not appear able to speak, which for a customer information officer is, I'm sure you'll grant, something of a handicap. I asked him if the next replacement bus would go to Leytonstone, which is a simple enough question. I wasn't asking him to consider a proposition from Wittgenstein. I simply said, "Will the next replacement bus go to Leytonstone?" And he replied in the following fashion, just faintest twitch of his head and that click. I then asked if that meant I should change at Loughton and get another bus, and he responded with what I took to be agreement. He went, eh. I tried again out of interest to get him to speak by remarking that it surely was a hot day. He went, uh-uh, following which I gave up. It was like talking to one of the Teletubbies. Without wishing to be offensive, here is a man whose job entails providing information, and he seemed only able to communicate in grunts. Literally. Because most of the passengers were also foreign, with English as a second language in many cases, watching these two groups of foreigners trying to understand each other was, well, interesting. The buses were infrequent, and the arrival of one almost caused a riot as noisy foreigners clamoured to board the thing, surging forward in a rugby scrum, while others banged on the side of the bus in anger and frustration at being unable to get on because it was full. Does anybody remember when people in London queued patiently and in good humour? Anybody queue jumping in those days was soon called to order by the rest of the people in the queue. The English queue was world famous. Social disapproval stopped anybody queue jumping. On trains, the behaviour is simply awful. There was a time when any man who saw a woman or old person standing would immediately offer his seat. I won't sit down on a tube train if women are standing. I wouldn't dream of it. On ordinary trains now there is a habit of people putting their bags on a seat next to them and not removing them, even when other people are standing. This oafish behaviour goes hand in hand with the practice of taking a seat near the aisle with an empty window seat beside them, thus effectively denying somebody else a chance of using that seat. I saw that a lot today. People standing and not liking to ask the person in the aisle seat to move over. What has happened is that all the old English conventions, the good manners which made travelling on buses, tubes and trains more pleasant and bearable, have all been scrapped as the number of foreigners in the capital increases. I'm not saying that there are no inconsiderate, selfish English people, of course, or trains or buses. What I am saying is that when a large enough proportion of people in an area of a city come from other countries with different customs and traditions, then these tend to replace the existing way of conducting ourselves. The end result is that travel on London's public transport is now a most stressful and unpleasant experience, whereas at one time it was actually fairly relaxing. London is in a completely different state from the rest of the country. It's like being in a separate country with its own customs and traditions, its own way of living, which had very little in common with English traditions.